So today we're going to do a risky and somewhat odd thing. For the first time ever, we're going to do a question box sermon. I have not seen the questions. You have been submitting them over the course of the last 2 weeks, and I am beyond grateful that a marvelous question asker, Susan Messina, has curated those questions and helped to sort of guide them into groupings, and she'll ask the questions while I prattle on. Now, you should know that our goal is to answer as many questions as possible in as pithy and poignant a manner as possible, but I do tend to talk a lot. So I shall attempt to edit myself knowing that we will not get to all of the questions, and then in some places where questions needed to be edited for content or clarity or multiple askers were asking similar questions, we have grouped them. Beyond the simple forbearance, knowing we will not cover everything, and a request for kindness if my answering on the fly means the whole thing comes out a little dodgy, the floor is yours. With gratitude, knowing that we come here to live the questions, and we come here building and creating the answers alongside one another. I assume these questions will be at some point silly and at some point serious, just like life, and just like church, and just like every single one of our hearts. Have at it.
We had more than 30 questions, so we will not get to them all for sure. So Nancy, I want to get the most difficult question out of the way. On a scale from 1 to 10, what is your favorite color in the alphabet?
So it's blue, number 9.
Perfect.
Don't you think? Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. At least 4 people submitted some version of this question, and it's a 2-parter.
If I forget the second part, can I come back at it?
Absolutely. Okay. They connect, though. What are River Road's strengths as a faith community? What are our strengths? And in what areas could we do more learning and growing?
As is the case with almost any beloved community, our strengths and the places where we could grow are kind of related to each other. I think our strength, which it has been since long before I ever arrived, is that we do congregational life in excellent ways. So almost everything we do, from the way we manage our finances, to the quality of our music, to even the deep intentionality that we put behind our committee work and our religious education, it is all excellent. There is nothing we do here that is not above the bar. We are not stick it together with duct tape people, right? We are people who believe that if we're going to do a thing, we're going to put our hearts and our souls in it, and we're going to deliver it to the best possible degree we can. Now, that is our greatest strength. And it makes our programming and our worship appealing and engaging and beautiful. Here is why it is also our greatest struggle. Because the performance of excellence does not always make enough room for vulnerability. And if we are so committed to being awesome at everything we do, sometimes we don't get the grace and the beauty of showing up and admitting that we have failed, or we have fallen short, or we're scared, or we don't know what to do next. So we did a leadership development thingy-do last fall, and they did all these assessments of like, what's the strength of our leadership? And we came out so high on things like organization and skill and capacity. We came out very low on relationality, right, John Kerner? The lowest mark, so there are marks of what's required for bold leadership. Relationality is among them, and our lowest score was relationality. And I think that's partly because we have to learn to trust each other, to be uncertain, to trust each other sometimes to not be excellent. And so I am doing my best to be not excellent here.
Fantastic. All right. Now, if we believe in UU principle number 1, which is the inherent worth and dignity of all human lives, how should we relate to people like our president? Or, as someone else put it more simply, how do I love Donald Trump? Go for it.
Reverend Amanda often says that if you look at me, I go on face journeys when people ask me questions. Like, you can see the whole world of my inner life passing over my face. That question gives me a face journey. I think it's related to this little theological theological richness that we've had about the benediction that I say every Sunday, right? And so, may the truth makes us free, hope never dies, love that casts out fear, guide us and those we love and those we do not love forward till the day spring breaks and the shadows flee away. There are times when we very much yearn, and sometimes you'll hear me tweak it to say those we don't yet love. And there are times when the only honest encapsulation of our anger and our disgust and our fear is to say, not only do I not love you, but I close the door on engagement with you altogether. So I just want to hold that tension is a theological struggle that happens within Unitarian Universalism as a whole, and then preach a 30-second Universalism sermon. So here's what I think Universalism teaches us. It does not teach us that everybody is fundamentally okay. It does not, I think, even teach us that we have to love everybody. What it teaches us is that the possibility of love is never completely shut down. Just as long as I have breath, says our classic hymn, I must answer yes to love. So yes, even the President of the United States is not in our theological resources completely shut off from the possibility of a kind of love that cracks open the fear. You do not have to like him. You do not have to like the person next to you in this sanctuary. But we do commit to the idea that we're never totally done with each other. I say that also knowing that in our lives, there are times when we have to really close doors. Like if someone hurts us, damages us, times of harm and oppression, we do need to cut off relationships at times. You don't have to personally love everybody, but the possibility of love is there for everybody.
There's a follow-up that I want to ask. It fits beautifully. It was next online. Related. In these times, when a difference in political opinion is now a reason to question a person's intelligence, character, and morality, is everyone still welcome here at River Road? And this person wrote, would my Trump-supporting father be welcome? Would my Christian evangelical friend be welcome?
That's a really good question. Okay, so there's this is going to sound like a critique, and it's not. It's just me trying to say the true thing. There's what we espouse, which is a grand abstract notion of welcome. A really beautifully stated commitment that the doors are open and you all come and we'll find a home here. Then there is the reality of the times we are living in and the particular kind of engaged responses in social justice work and in theology that is demanded in these times, right? And I will say this, that speaking into these times without offering some critique of the current administration would feel fake and banal and like we were selling you a bill of goods. Given that reality, somebody with a very strong, not just Republican, but nationalist identity or white nationalist identity would walk in this place and hear a whole bunch of stuff they don't want to hear. The question is, are we willing, in beloved community, to sometimes hear things we don't want to hear? So to take it off of a Trump supporter, let's say you have a particular theological perspective that not everybody in this sanctuary shares. Are you willing to show up here and listen to a word for someone else get preached? Are you willing to show up here and listen to a message that was not designed for you and then keep showing up again? Because that's part of what pluralism in congregational life is about. People sometimes say that it would be a problem if any one congregant in this room agreed with more than 70% of what is preached from this pulpit, right? if any one of us was getting a full message tailored directly to them, that means that the rest of us aren't getting a message for us. So I want to invite all of us to be uncomfortable, to hear your ministers say things you don't like, to hear your fellow travelers say things you don't like, and stay in it together. And in that way, yes, we can build a wider welcome. And sometimes I'm gonna make you mad.
I took up my pen and wrote, because you used the word pluralism in congregational life. That actually connects to this much larger question, which is, how can we better draw on the best of all world faith traditions to address common public concerns like climate change, global inequities?
How can we better draw on the
all world faith traditions to address common public concerns?
Okay, so first a critique and then an actual answer. There are times when Unitarian Universalist spaces can feel like world religions tourism, right? When we have a point to make, and so we go and pluck a story from the Sufi tradition, or we go and pluck a piece of music from Islam, or we go and pluck a story without context, I think it is desperately important for us to fight this temptation to make of the world's religious traditions fodder for our pre-existing stories about Unitarian Universalism. And so when I am using a resource from one of the world's religious traditions, I try to contextualize that to make sure if I'm preaching a story from the Hebrew tradition, I am also preaching a sermon that backs up that story. So I want us to be careful in how we, in this place, utilize those resources, especially if, for me, those resources are not resources I grew up interpreting. You have to respect those traditions. The other real answer that I will say after that critique is that the way we bring the power of diverse religious perspectives to bear on this world is by being in actual accountable relationship to people who follow those religious traditions. The way we do this is to show up at the Islamic Community Center, as so many of us did in the midst of the latest wave of Islamic hysteria, to wear the headscarves and stand alongside people and have absolutely nothing but open hearts to what those folks have to tell us about what their tradition says in the world at large. We have to show up when yet another anti-Semitic shooting and hate crime has happened in our community, which there have been 6 anti-Semitic hate crimes in Montgomery County in the last year and a half. And so we are called to show up as Unitarian Universalists who have rich and complex religious identities. Like some of us are Unitarian Universalists, right? Like we're no less Jewish because we're part of a Unitarian Universalist congregation. And some of us are no less Muslim because we're part of a Unitarian Universalist congregation. But we need to be out in the world relating meaningfully, not trying to get everybody to come in here on our terms and relate meaningfully to us in ways that we can pick and choose.
All right. Do you have a weird, hidden talent you've never told us about? And if so, could you describe it or demonstrate it?
Oh, good Lord. Good Lord. Well, my talent is very annoying.
Even better.
So I'm a big CrossFitter. I, 5 days a week, am lifting very heavy weights and doing absurd amounts of push-ups. And you know what the first rule of CrossFit is? You always talk about CrossFit. And I have tried very hard not to always talk about CrossFit. People are like, when are you going to do a CrossFit sermon? I'd be like, never. But yeah, I can deadlift 270 pounds. I can bench press my body weight, which I will not be telling you what that is. And I will not be demonstrating any of those activities because they're very goofy looking. What I would say is that the reason I do this very physically demanding thing is because so much of my work and so much of your work in the world is inherently not doable. So David Ward, you are trying to prevent gun violence. You're trying to stop the shootings in Baltimore, right? It is inherently not doable, and yet you are in it. You are wading in the impossible waters. I am trying every single day to be present to the sorrows and the joys of your lives, to help you make meaning and purpose in the face of the unknowable. None of that is something I can check off a list and be finished with ever. So most of my life I spend in the inherent impossibility of the real work, as do so many of you. And CrossFit, there's a bar in front of me. I can lift it or I cannot. It's clean and evident. I can do those 20 pull-ups or I cannot. And so there's a way in which I do this very demanding physical thing so that there is something I know I have done.
That's good.
Yeah.
What would keep visitors of color who visit River Road wanting to come back, do you think?
So first, a big overgeneralized statement that is also the very truest thing you can say, which is that every single one of us is coming here yearning, I think, for similar things. Not the exact same things, but similar things. And people of color, especially Black leaders in our community, are coming here as human beings, yearning for and looking for almost the exact same thing that a white-identified leader of color or Asian Pacific Islander leader of color might be looking for. They're looking for community, for a place where the theology is held loosely enough to set them free instead of hold them back. Folks are looking for a place to connect, to push back the alienation and disconnection of this world. And yes, folks are looking for hope and for the capacity to make meaning in the midst of inherently meaningless nonsense of this world. So on one level, it doesn't matter what your presenting identities or the overlapping oppressions that those identities bring really are. It matters that you come in here searching. Now here's the next step. That so often when people who have historically marginalized identities of one kind or another, trans folks, people of color, even sometimes in our history, women, when folks with historically marginalized identities come into a community, what too often happens is that community intentionally and unintentionally telegraphs that it's made and held for someone else, right? So if the stories and the culture and the leadership present what we are about in such a way that whiteness is at the center and the identities around the margins are kept at the margins, then always it feels for those of us who are people of color like we are just enough on the outside that we can never fully come home to this place. So what leaders of color want and visitors want is the same damn thing you want, except they want for once to do that in the context of a place that makes sure the we is always a we that includes their voices, so that there isn't this continual pain of folks drawing too narrow a we that draws out those with historically marginalized identities. They want what you want what I want. You all, leaders of color, want what I want. And you want to be able to show up and not get hurt.
Thank you. You said the way that we include their voices, and the second question relates to that. Someone wrote, recognizing that there are many social justice groups here with which members can get involved, I am wondering, said this person, why all our racial justice pathway groups are led by women.
That's a solid question. And before I answer it, let me back up to the previous question, which is our we, as River Road Unitarian Universalist congregation, is already a multicultural, multiracial we. So I've paid a lot of attention lately to what I call checking my we, right? So if I'm standing up here proclaiming a we that assumes the we includes mostly white people, I am already not preaching to my people because we are already a wider we. And when we think about multiculturalism and diversity, it isn't a matter of talking about what they want, it's a matter of talking about what we already want right here. Because our we is already far more diverse than I think we acknowledge in a lot of ways. So then to this really good question, why is it that our racial justice groups, the racial justice pathways, are currently all led by women? Firstly, I'm gonna say I don't think I have the full answer on that, except that the problem is not ours alone. So in progressive faith spaces, places like showing up for racial justice, places like even Black Lives Matter. A lot of the frontline leaders of Black Lives Matter DC are very young women. I'm talking like women 22, 23, 24, putting their bodies and their leadership and their pure unadulterated skill on the line. And the risk that those young women are taking astonishes me every day. We have seen a hollowing out of men's engagement in public activist spaces across the board in the last 15, 20 years. You look back at the civil rights movement, and you see so much of like the great men, the kind of men with so much gravitas that like they raise an eyebrow and the whole room goes silent. These movements were led by the great men of their era, and now we see a fundamental sea change. One thing I would say is that this is, of course, not your father's civil rights era, right? There are changes in how women's leadership and changes in how the leadership of people of color impact the world. But also, guys, we need you. I can't tell you how much we need you. And we need white guys, right? We need white guys who can stand there and say, I am not afraid to be a prophet too. It grieves me that we don't have enough men active in our social justice groups. And I want merely to say, the table is wide open, and not only are you welcome, but you are needed quite desperately.
Going bigger than us, what's the biggest challenge you see facing Unitarian Universalism at this time?
So I'm going to give a nerdy tactical answer, and this is probably about, maybe we'll take one more after this. Here's a nerdy tactical answer. Patterns in religious participation in this country are changing. For any of you who have spent any time in Europe or like interacting with European civic life, religion in Europe tanked about 30 to 50 years ago, right? So the whole place is full of like cavernous, empty churches everywhere you go. This is an honest thing. Religion in America is a failing business model. That includes progressive religion in America. Folks who are any younger than me, and I'm a Gen Xer, folks who are any younger than me certainly did not grow up with any expectation or acculturation of being a part of a religious community, and Xers like me are super allergic to hypocrisy. So we tend not to be joiners, people who come in and join up in religious institutions, but participators, people who want to participate in the life and the activities of those institutions. What happens is that the strong institutional commitment that we saw in baby boomers and in the greatest generation folks is starting to tail off. And so giving and participation and even membership in most US denominations is tanking fast. We here at River Road are not tanking fast, but neither are we growing. And so I think our greatest challenge is to figure out what participation and commitment and leadership looks like for a whole new generation of Unitarian Universalists, knowing it may look fundamentally different than what it looked like for the generations before us.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one last question, but I'm going to say we didn't get to a whole section on death and dying. Lots of questions, that larger religion, and then some other random ones. So I will share those with Nancy. Maybe we will see some sermons preached on those in the future. We shall see. But for our last question, if you were a vegetable side dish, what sauce would complement you the best?
Oh, my. Patrina Hollingsworth, I know you asked that question.
Accurate.
I'm going to tell you that the vegetable side dish I would most definitely be is one of those Midwestern casseroles with like some cream of chicken soup all in it and cheese on top. That's who I would be. Like fundamentally nourishing and cozy. And then you just got to squirt ketchup ball on that. That's all I have to say. There you go, Patrina. Our closing hymn. Did you think I was going to say arugula? No. I want to invite you to rise in body or spirit for our closing hymn. Now, Cliff and I are aware that this hymn is long and it gets boring, so we're just going to do the first and the last verses of this hymn.